That last week when Ralph Nader talked, he began by speaking about the fact that so few classes ever examine themselves, in some sense, examine the university. And he made the comment that at Harvard Law School they could look at everything else except for Harvard Law School. And so I was thinking that here's a bunch of us crazy professors cobbled together who became interested in this topic, but academics study everything. Maybe we can actually get an academic who actually does this for real. And that's why I'm so delighted to introduce you today to Kadie Otto, who is a professor of sports management at Western Carolina University and has been involved in examining many of the issues that we're looking at for a long time. And I think we'll be able to provide a perspective that combines both the Berkeley perspective that we've been concentrating on to some degree, but also putting it in a national context. So, Kadie.
Thanks. Thank you all for having me. It's been lovely to see your library in particular when I was walking through campus. Beautiful and very, very large. I think I would love it here. I did have an opportunity to listen to Ralph's speech. And number one, I'd like to say I don't think it's fair that I have to follow him because that's impossible. And number two, I'm going to try to get into a little bit more detail. I felt like Ralph's perspective is really broad and more of a macro look, and I love that. And so I'm going to take it down to the micro level and give you some case-in-point examples as to what's going on with the athletes. Just to give you a quick background, I played Division III basketball at Wheaton College in Illinois, outside of Chicago. And then, following my basketball time, I always wanted to be a women's basketball coach. So I had the opportunity to go down to Florida State University and be the women's basketball graduate assistant. And I tell you this for a reason. Namely, after about a year, I started to see some things that went on that I found to be very questionable from an ethical perspective. And I started to wonder if I was going to go down this road of being perhaps, big-time Division I women's basketball coach, that I would indeed be faced with having to compromise my ethics at some point in time. And so I felt that I didn't want to do that, and I moved into academia and ended up researching this issue of corruption in college athletics for the past 14 years now. So, with that, we all know what's going on here with this shift of athletics from participatory to athletics that is commercially driven. And the fallout from that, I think, is there's any number of points that are problematic, but in particular for the athletes, okay? Because the goal of athletics, at least in its impetus, was to provide an outlet, obviously, for young people physically, but secondarily, I believe it was a vehicle through which we could teach important character building things and things that they would carry into their lives. So I put this quote up here. It says, fascinating. I'm going to ask you, what year do you think this quote was published in the Atlantic Monthly? This is former president of a university who said, American universities are discovering their latest and growing responsibility, namely to provide entertainment. And of all the instrumentalities we have at our fingertips, to include the arts, music, and athletics, athletics is by far the best. In what year do you think this was published? Anyone? 90s. 1990s. What else?
Recently?
More recently. How about 1954?
Oh
1954. So if you look at the shift of higher education to a business model, we can see that that was taking place way back in time. And when we look at sport, we like to look at sport as a mirror of what's going on in greater society. So it's no surprise that sport would start to slip into that business model as well. The problem with the shift to the business model is that it's antithetical to the NCAA's own bylaws. Okay? And the two bylaws that I want to focus on today, one is the fundamental policy, and two is called the principle of amateurism. Fundamental policy, in particular, that college athletics should be integral part of the university, and the athlete should be an integral part of the student body. We know that it's certainly not the case today. and that we should retain a clear line of demarcation between professional sports and college sports. Now, let me just frame this a little bit further. We're talking about big-time college athletics. I'm at Western Carolina. That's not a big-time program, although they would love to be, and they're pouring more and more money into their athletics. It's a real shame, I think, but there's been a trickle-down effect where the small, what we would call mid-major schools want to be like a Cal and athletically, and it's just never going to happen. The principle of amateurism is the bedrock principle of the NCAA, okay? So student athletes shall be amateurs. Their participation should be motivated primarily by education. Participation in athletics should be an avocation, something one does in one's free time. The problem with that is a recent study by the NCAA showed that 44 hours a week on average football players are spending in their sport. That's more than a full-time job. So imagine you guys, just pretend you're athletes if you would. Put yourself in their position. Okay, some of them are not even academically qualified to get into school in the first place. Okay, so they're way behind the 8 ball already. Then on top of that, they're working more than a full-time job. And they're supposed to be able to be successful academically. That's 2 strikes before they even start. And then finally, athletes should be protected from exploitation. Okay? And we're going to get into this in great detail. Now, how has the NCAA been able to do what they've done so far? Well, Miles Brand, the late Miles Brand, he passed away a few years back, former president of the NCAA, came out with a statement. Now, he was a philosophy, PhD in philosophy. He came out with this statement. He said, we need not be ambivalent about doing the business of college athletics because the enterprise is not amateur, only the athletes are amateur. Okay? So he was effectively able to play a nice little, what we would call linguistic a twist of words to convince, I would say, the better part of our colleges and universities that what was going on was fine. There was no problem with that. I knew there was something wrong with it, I just didn't know how to show it. So what I did, this is kind of interesting. My father is also a retired philosophy professor. He specialized in linguistic analysis, and he got his PhD from the University of Pennsylvania. His committee at the time said, we don't really know what you're doing here, we're going to send you to MIT. You're going to go work with Noam Chomsky on your dissertation, and that's what he did. So I knew my dad would be able to handle this. So I said, Dad, I said, could you run a linguistic analysis on the word amateur? I mean, this is like groundbreaking for our field. No one's ever done this. He said, this is going to be really important. It's going to come into play because there's a lot happening. There's reform going on, and there's going to be a shift. So he said, sure, I'll do it. It was easy. Let's put it this way. It was really easy for him, okay? So he went ahead and did it, and he started with first defining Brand's definition of amateur, okay? Which he defined as one who gets no share of any financial return produced by your own activity. Okay, so that's slavery, really. Okay, but we're going to come back to my dad's work. We're going to come back to it. So we both obviously are Ottos. His name is Herbert. Mine is not. So I'm going to go with H.R. Otto for my dad. And let's get into the benefits. What have we seen the benefits of the athlete's production? It's almost never ending. It's like this cash cow. I mean, imagine having a business and not having to pay your laborers. It's fascinating. It's brilliant. It's perfect. So here are some of the benefits. The television contract, we know, $10.8 billion over 14 years. Now get your mind around this. This is 3 weeks of men's basketball. Just 3 weeks. That's worth $750 million for 3 weeks of coverage. Young men running up and down the court, shooting a ball. So, just as a comparison, I looked up the gross domestic product of Afghanistan. In 2008, their GDP was $11 billion. Just to wrap your head around that kind of money. The NCAA's contract is equivalent to the GDP of Afghanistan. Fascinating. Trickle-down effect, each to do, which is to put too much information on slides. And I'm doing it deliberately to show you how many licensee agreements exist with the NCAA. We're talking about 40 plus. Anything from bobblehead dolls to, I was hanging out with a friend one day and I said, do you have any gum? And she handed me her pack of gum. And it was UNC Chapel Hill Tar Heel gum. Okay, because I came over from North Carolina. Tar Heel gum. I'm thinking, this is amazing. They're making money off of everything. Trademarks, there's over 60 trademarks. Fascinating, especially when you look down toward the bottom. It says the road to Atlanta, the road to Indianapolis, the road to Minneapolis, the road to New Orleans are all trademark protected. Okay? Anyone using those marks the NCAA can collect money off of that. Okay? All protected material. Corporate sponsors. Let's not leave out Cal. That's why I'm here in the first place. A to Z, you have 123 corporate sponsors in your athletic, in business relationship with your athletic department. And then I got tired of doing this. I said, forget it. I'm not writing them all up on the screen. I wrote A to B, and then I said, that's enough. So you guys have to look them all up, but I ended with Zipcar, which is the Z. 123. What's the problem when a business entity gets involved with the university? Okay, philosophically, things can be compromised in a hurry. Pepsi, I threw Pepsi on there because Ralph pointed out some interesting social and ethical issues with Pepsi. But that's one of yours. And you also have a casino in there. That was C, I think that hit on C, so I didn't write that down. How about the coaches' salaries? Why have we seen such an escalation in coaches' salaries across the country? I mean, this has been obscene, absolutely obscene. While faculty are being laid off, departments are being cut, universities have no problem finding millions of dollars to pay their coaches. Okay? Now, if you guys want to look into this in more detail, go to the USA Today. They've done some great work. All coaches' salaries up to date, athletic director salaries all up to date. Right now, 6 athletic directors in this country make more than $1 million. Your very own, Sandy Barber, not to be left out, makes just under, $500,000 in 1 year. Vanderbilt, and I was shocked. Vanderbilt came in first at $2.5 million. The reason I was shocked, and he is David Williams. The second place is Jeremy Foley at Florida. He makes 1.5. So you're talking about $1 million discrepancy between Vanderbilt and Florida. I was shocked, reason being Vanderbilt made a very deliberate point to say, we are dismantling our athletic department and we're going to house it under academics and we're going to be a model of integration of athletics into higher education. So when I saw his salary, I just felt it went through the roof. Football coaches, we're talking about the FBS, that's 120 schools. Okay, FBS, football bowl, subdivision schools, there's 120, half make $1 million or more. Now half would basically be all the BCS schools, because there's 60 schools in the BCS. Okay, so here at Cal, Jeff Tedford, he makes the most money of any Pac-12 coach, $2.3 million. Alabama's Nick Saban makes the most money, $6 million a year. Now when you look at these salaries, you go into USA Today, pay close attention to how much money is coming from the university, funded by the university, and how much money is coming from outside sources. You will be floored. Because I went in there and I looked at it, and for example, it'll say something like, the coach's salary is $2.3 million, Tedford's. And 2.3 is funded by the university. Other sources of funding, 0. Or another coach will say 2.3 million, other sources of funding, $5,000. Okay, so it's quite shocking. So let's take a look at your coach's contract. I printed it off, and you can pull these contracts on USA Today. They had to go through the Freedom of Information Act to get the schools to release this stuff, which is embarrassing. This stuff should be released. There should be transparency, okay? But let me just read you a couple things you might be floored. The base salary, prorated monthly, for this coach here, your coach, is no less than $225,000 a month. Folks, I missed my calling. I should have gone into coaching. More than a dozen women's basketball coaches right now make more than $1 million. I could have been loaded. But I wouldn't be able to sleep at night. That's a trade-off. I like sleeping. 2 courtesy vehicles signed to the coach. His talent fee for doing speaking engagements, being on television and so on, $1.5 million. If the coach wins the bowl championship, he gets $1 million. If he coaches over 1 full year and starts the next year, he gets a bonus of $500,000. Annual performance-based compensation. If he makes the Alamo Bowl, he gets $60,000. I'm pointing this out for a reason, because there's over 33 bowl games now. That means over half of the FBS schools go to a bowl. Now what's that doing? That's rewarding mediocrity. It says right here, in the event that Cal goes to any non-BCS bowl game, he gets $30,000. He gets $30,000 for being mediocre. Jeez. Imagine that. If he gets Coach of the Year, he gets $100,000. This is fascinating. At the very bottom of all his bonuses, it's his academic performance bonuses. They are worth the least amount of money. He just gets a measly, to me it's a lot, $20,000 if his team gets a 2.8 or better. Now how would you like it if your professor, one of your professors got money based on how you were doing with your GPA? I mean, what's the average GPA of this class? 3 point something, I'm assuming 3.5, let's say. We got to look into this. What if Brian Barsky is getting a $25,000 bonus if the average GPA is 3.5 or better? This is ridiculous. He has an extra $250,000 pool, just a pool of money to give away to his assistants as incentives if he thinks they're doing well or something. He has a country club membership, of course. 30 tickets to the football game, 5 parking places. And this is the last one I'm going to point out.
That usually requires a Nobel Prize normally.
Yeah. Okay. So what does it say about our values is what we're getting to that point, right? It's really unfortunate.
5 Nobel Prize winners.
Yeah. It's unbelievable. But I'm going to just speak to this last point about your renovations, because I know you had someone come in talking about your new stadium that's going to take effect here soon. It says that the coach will receive a $250,000 bonus if he's still the coach on the day that the football team fully occupies the new Simpson High Performance Center. What?
Can I just point out by coincidence, yesterday was the ribbon cutting for that building that you just described. And so I suppose in the forthcoming weeks that will occur. And as I recall, there's a second $250,000 bonus at the time when the stadium gets occupied. So together it's a $500,000.
Yes, when the west side improvements are completed. That's another $250,000. Now get this. This is awesome. He also gets paid that amount of money within 30 days. Wow. Now let me ask you something. He gets money for getting 9 victories or more in one season. Which is more likely? The Cal football team could win 9 victories without their coach, or that Cal could win 9 football games without their team? Well, this is ridiculous, and you wonder why the athletes are upset. They should be a lot more upset than they are. But if you just look at, let's say, Texas basketball's revenue last year, bringing in over $15 million, if there was some sort of players' union that could collectively bargain for rights and money, you're looking at the amount of money that 13 scholarship athletes at Texas on the football team would have made. $684,000 each player. So again, it does explain a little bit why the coaches' salaries are so out of whack. Because the trickle-down effect stops at the coaches. Okay, it goes from the NCAA to the members' conferences. Conferences trickle it down to the schools. Schools also have their own stuff going, like the television networks. And then it stops. I mean, sorry, then it goes to the coaches, then it stops. So if we took the $6 million Saban makes at Alabama and divvied it up amongst the people that are actually responsible for the product, then you're looking at quite a nice salary for those guys. So what's the problem? Why can't this happen? Well, it's going to bring us back to the amateurism issue. I love Marxist critique of capitalism. I imagine a number of you in here do too. I really appreciate it, and it fits perfectly with the NCAA model. Namely that the athletes are the laborers, unpaid, and they're completely taken advantage of. And they're able to do this because no one's been able to crack the word amateur. And again, that's why I felt that we had to go about and do that linguistic analysis. The NCAA controls the rules, okay, and then the superstructure through sanctions, which are filtered down into the social institutions, which we know are the teams who reinforce that, and the cycle just continues. So until the athletes rise up, and you guys are all about revolution and protest, right? The athletes rise up. Here's what I'm saying. Imagine this. Picture the Final Four in Ford Fieldhouse. 90,000 fans. Nationally, internationally televised. $750 million on the table for 3 weeks of men's basketball. The Final Four. Picture this. This is the unrealized power of the athletes. Okay? First two teams come out on the court. The official comes to the middle of the floor with his whistle in his mouth. He has the ball. Throws the ball up into the middle. And the two athletes doing the jump ball, who are about 6'10" or maybe 7 feet tall, step away from the mid-court, and the ball just drops. And next thing you know, all the players walk off the court. All hell would break loose. I would love to see it. Okay, and I mean, television networks are going to go berserk. Coaches are going to be screaming, "Get back on the court," trying to drag the players back on. I'm going to take away your scholarship. Imagine the power. But that's the power that those athletes have. So if something like that could or might happen, I would love to be around to see it. That's what needs to happen, I really think. Something that radical. Maybe you guys could help. So that brings us back to my dad's work on the issue of amateurism, because it's basically like they're in lockdown. Okay? They just can't, the athletes have no power. So what Brand was able to do is decouple the participants from that which they participate in, so that one does not affect the other. Essentially what it does is it allows the NCAA to have their cake and eat it too. Okay? The problem with this, and they brought it on themselves, is that they had to insert one phrase into bylaw 2.9. Okay? Because we know, and in this case X is the athlete, X's activity is producing a profit. They produce a product, results in a profit, and it's received by other people other than themselves. Okay? But with the addition and inclusion of exploitation in bylaw 2.9, they're also being exploited, and therein lies the conflict. Okay? So, what does that mean? It means we need a new definition of the word amateur. Now, I didn't put the linguistic equation in here because I don't even know how to explain it, to be honest, and I didn't want to screw it up, so to speak. So I'm just giving you the real basic stuff. My dad would have to be here to give you the actual linguistic formula. But here is the amateur definition in common language. X is an amateur if and only if no one receives financial benefit from X's play. Okay? And that's what brings us to the issue of exploitation again in bylaw 2.9. In such circumstances, X's playing is not an amateur activity, nor is X therefore an amateur. To make matters worse, X is actually the victim of exploitation by the very party who's charged to protect them. I mean, if you want to talk about irony, that's thick. I like to think about it in like your parents. The job of your parents is to protect their children. So imagine parents doing the exact opposite, actually just taking advantage. I mean, it's really backwards. So ultimately, what really is the cost to the athlete from an academic perspective? I'm going to throw these two questions out here for you. Do big-time college athletics actually harm the academic and educational functions of the university? We know they do, but I want to give you the flip side. Does participation in big-time college athletics actually harm the athletes' opportunity to get an academic education or to get an education? Of course it does. Because what we're seeing now is that the athlete is now just a means to an end. Okay? Let me give you a couple examples here. This is research that was commissioned by the NCAA. 65% of athletes believe that their GPA would be higher if they did not participate in sports. That's powerful, powerful result right there. It's hindering them from getting an education is what it's doing. Now this is interesting. I've been tracking my baseball players over time, their GPA. In the fall, they're doing quite well. I've never had any problems with my baseball players anyway. 3.1 to 3.3 on average, their GPA in the fall. Springtime, come springtime when they have to carry a 60-game schedule and they're off campus 2 days a week on average, playing 3-game stretches, their GPA drops an entire entire point. They go from 3.1 to 3.3 on average to a 2.1 to a 2.3. Would you risk that? Can you imagine your GPA shifting an entire point from the fall to the spring and what that would do to your cum? That's what happens. And these guys are capable. Obviously, they're getting a 3.2 in the fall. They can do that. Come springtime, and they'll tell you. It's because of the fact that they have baseball and are always out there playing. Now, this is also interesting. I view myself more as an athlete than a student. 62% of athletes responded that they agreed, strongly agreed, or somewhat agreed with that statement. This is another powerful contract that we can use, okay? It's called the Athletic Financial Aid Contract. This is the contract all athletes engage in with the university for their scholarship. And it says, and I quote, University X, whatever, I'll call it Entertainment University, hereby awards you a grant and aid to enable you to get further your education. The problem that we're seeing today is this issue called academic clustering, and I want to end with this academic clustering stuff. Those of you that are not familiar with it, came about in the mid-'80s. Academic clustering is where you see a disproportionate percentage of athletes on a team in a certain major, academic major, versus the general student body. Okay? And the way that I interpret the results is I really believe that this is an example where clustering is effectively disabling instead of enabling the athlete from furthering their education. Because they may have a handful of 5 majors that they can choose from because they're being told, you know, you can only major in this, this, and that because it won't conflict with your sport. And the university offers 120 majors. that's a problem. I looked at the Pac-10, I call it 10 because my data is from 2009, 2010, when you guys were the Pac-10. Pac-10 and SEC. I'm just going to show you a little bit of the Pac-10. 7 out of 10 schools, there was clustering. One school, extreme clustering at UCLA. Extreme clustering defined as 40% or more of the upperclassmen football players in one major. Clustering, 25% or more. Okay? Again, just upperclassmen. So let's see, Cal came in at 38%. Your clustered major here at Cal is American Studies. I'm not sure, I don't know much about the major. All this to say, 1% of the student body majors in that and 38% of your football team. Okay? Does anyone have a friend who majors in American Studies? Sounds like there are about 250 majors at your university who are in that, and 38% of those are football players. Now this is the pie chart just for the minority upperclassmen at Cal, and I want you to just look at this carefully, because what is really going on with this data is it shows 6 different majors, but when I looked into these at your school, it turns out 3 of them are in an interdisciplinary major, and the other 3 are multidisciplinary major, which means 100% of the minority football players on your team are in an interdisciplinary, or multidisciplinary major. For your Caucasian football players, 79% are interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, or social behavioral sciences. One lone soul is in the civil engineering program, and mechanical. You've got one in mechanical. God bless him.
He's in my class.
Yeah.
Is he still in the major?
Last year he was.
Okay.
It's my theory.
You want to tell your theory, Alice?
My
Yeah.
theory is we have one of the largest football teams.
Okay.
120?
This is why it's so expensive and we're losing money. But we have one of the largest football teams. My theory is that they bring in these walk-ins
Yes.
to raise the GPA.
Yeah.
And so the ME student is a walk-in. He only played once.
Okay. Yeah, that's very common. They'll take a guy that's really smart and has a high GPA because he'll help bring up the APR of the team. Here's something else that's going on. One of my colleagues just published this study. What he did was he tracked, actually 2 colleagues from Nova Southeastern down in Florida. They tracked the movement of athletes major over time, because some of these athletes do come in and they say, hey, I want to do civil engineering. I'm going to do it, even though the coach says you can't do it. There's no way. You'll never, use no time. He starts as a civil engineering major, but then as he moves through, if he's staying on the football team, you see him, say, junior year, all of a sudden he becomes an American Studies major. So you can see the 4-year trend, and that's interesting.
Yeah, and I don't know whether the student graduated with that major. That's a good question, because your data ends 2010.
Yeah, it's just the 1 year.
Can we just point out that if such a student were to excel academically and not do very well on the field, that he or she would then lose his or her scholarship?
Most likely, yeah, but the athlete can appeal it. And I'll tell you what, because most of the time the athlete doesn't know. Okay, they're not that aware of the rules and so on. Some of them may be. I tell all my athletes, I said, you go and you appeal it. And I will go to bat for you. I'll do all the data. I'll support you. They can go and appeal it, and most likely the athletic department would not pull it. That's my understanding, if they're up against an appeal. But most of the time the athlete's not appealing, because you've got to remember what the coach does. What the coach does is he calls his other friends across the country first. He says, I'm going to let so-and-so go. Do you want him? And he'll find 2 or 3 schools that can use the guy, and he would play. So they kind of set him up beforehand, and they say, well, I talked to so-and-so, you could go play X, Y, and Z school. And since the kid usually loves football, he does want to play, he may go ahead and leave this transfer. So it's a shame. UCLA, clustered majors, history. 62% of the football team majors in history, and 5% of the student body, which is actually high. It's a very popular major over there. Minority football players. Let me take a look at this. Oh, 85% are history or sociology. Okay? Caucasians, you're looking at 75% as history or sociology. Okay, now this was fascinating. I didn't put anyone in a category they weren't supposed to be in. So when I pulled this data from their media guides, 2 players wrote, my major is history and or political science. That's what he said. And the other guy said, my major is history and or economics. So he didn't know yet. So I didn't place them in the history category. Now if they ended up being history majors, that pushes that 57% up to 67. Okay? And again, you only have 4 majors represented out of 21 students. Now this was the most fascinating thing I saw at UCLA. I guarantee when I'm saying this right now, next year they won't put this in the media guide. Okay, but we've had this happen. As soon as a clustering study came out, one school in the ACC stopped publishing the athletes' majors in their media guide. And I wouldn't be surprised if this happens as well. But they asked the athlete, what's your career goal? Okay, and the M stands for minority. That's their major, and that's what the last thing is what their career goal is. A minority history major, who's also a football player, wants to be a civil engineer. And so I saw this trend, I'm thinking, my gosh. So I looked up all the major offerings at UCLA. Lo and behold, they have a major in civil engineering, they have a major in computer design, they have a major in television, sports media, and they have a major in architectural engineering. Wouldn't you know it? Huh. That's interesting. And then USC. The reason I pulled USC for you guys to look at is because they had clustering in 2 different majors. Okay? So they exceeded the 25% threshold in 2 different majors, sociology and then a major called public policy management and planning. And you can see 34% in sociology compared to 1.6% of the student body. And then 27% in public policy compared to 3%. So this is interesting stuff. What does it all mean? To me, it suggests that the athletes are not only exploited from an economic perspective, which is bad enough, but now we're looking at significant academic exploitation, and that's where I really get fired up. Because that's not right. Okay? So what do we do from here? I'm going to skip that. Oh, that's just to give you a quick overview. Overall, in the the whole Pac-10, 92% of the football upperclassmen are in the social and behavioral sciences for a major. The SEC came in at 78 or 9%, so both are very, very high. What do we do from here? That's my point. I think there's 2 options. We can either go back to our original model of college athletics, and where an athlete really is part of the student body, and the athlete does have a legitimate chance, just like any of you, to earn an education. But I just don't think that's going to happen because of the runaway money train. It's just, we can't stop it. Okay? So the alternative then, is to, oh, and I posted up here, these are the proposals from the Drake Group, which I'm involved in, past president now. Okay. I might come back to that if you have questions on it, but for the sake of time, the other option is to try to change the relationship that exists, okay, the current means of production relationship between the NCAA and the athletes. Okay, right now it's top down, but if they can change it to more of a horizontal struggle, that would be a little bit fairer. But what would happen is we would still lose the academic element, I believe. Because now you're just talking about the athlete trying to make sure that they get the right cut of the pie, the financial pie. So we lose the most important element that I believe, and why I'm involved in this field in the first place, of sport. What a valuable vehicle to teach young people important things that they can take in their life, but we're not seeing that happen today with our athletes. We've lost it. So this option I don't really like. The only reason I like it is from a financial perspective, they actually get a share of what they're responsible for producing. The association you might want to look into is the National College Players Association. That was founded by Ramogi Huma, who is a former UCLA athlete. A very powerful organization. They've effected a lot of change already. But their focus is on the well-being of the athlete from a physical or financial perspective, whereas our focus is on the academic perspective. So I'm going to have to wrap it up. Does anyone have any questions? What are your thoughts on the two different models?
I had a question just about something you said earlier about the NCAA. You're saying that the money stops at the coaches. How that's kind of part of the reason why they earn so much is because their players generate so much for the NCAA and then it trickles down. But I'm wondering, does it go through the university before it gets to the coaches? Is it the university's, I guess when the NCAA gives money to the universities through contracts, is that how it works?
Well, there's two things going on. The men's basketball tournament does a payout. They do a payout based on how far you go through the tournament. Okay, the BCS is its own entity. They don't share any of that. It doesn't go through the NCAA at all. Okay, and that's a monopoly. That's a legalized monopoly. So is the NCAA, though, and it's been called a cartel by the courts. But what happens is if you look at the television contracts of the university or conference, the conference has a massive television contract. That money gets distributed to each member university, and then their ticket sales, merchandising, and so on. That's where the money for the contract's got to be coming from, not directly from the NCAA.
I guess the money, but it goes to the university, and then the university, I guess, decides to pay the coach a certain amount.
It's the universities to begin with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then what I'm wondering is, do you think that the universities feel pressured to give coaches so much money because
Absolutely.
because of the NCAA and like the payouts and such? That
Because it's an arms race. No, because Cal probably gave Tedford 2.3 because they wanted to keep him here. And then, UCLA may have offered him 1.9. I mean, it just turns into a bidding war. Yeah, questions?
I have a question. In an interview you did with ESPN, it was directed toward a different question, but basically your answer was that don't put the blame on the basketball player. He didn't want to be a student anyway. So do you consider our student athletes as students before they're athletes? And if so, should the possibility of paying these athletes be strongly considered on our campus?
Yeah, there's two things going on there. Now think about it from a contractual perspective. The NCAA is offering an education to an athlete in exchange for their athletic talents, okay? The assumption is the athlete wants the education. Some do not, in which case that's not an even exchange from a contractual perspective. If they do want it, then the next question is, are they being afforded it? The opportunity to get it. So it depends. I wouldn't say all athletes don't want to be educated.
But do you think that they should be paid as their occupation as student athlete?
If they're literally getting an education and that's what they want to do? No, I don't. I think that what they need to do is take the athletic enterprise and make it a separate business entity and hire their athletes And then, like, you know, if the kids want to go to university, they can try to get admitted just like you guys, right? But no, I wouldn't pay them as a student athlete.
Thank you.
Oh, by the way, did anyone watch South Park?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's hilarious.
Awesome. We have it on the website. So I think one last question.
Yeah. Oh,
Oh, I'm sorry. Was it over here?
go ahead.
I was real quick
Real quick,
wondering, I'm kind of interested in the kind of like the religion of football and like how, you know, when it doesn't, when the thought of making amateurism, making the word more applicable to the situation today, like that people, it won't fit in their ideology.
Right, right.
So I'm wondering, like, do you think that it would it be possible to kind of like, the change has to come from the outside people around the whole system, or do the athletes themselves have to see themselves as something other than amateurs?
I think everybody pretty much knows it's the myth of the student athlete. I think it comes down to actually now changing it, whether it be legally through the courts or whether the NCAA tries to change it through the governing body. But I think at this point, everyone pretty much knows it's a joke, right? So, yeah.
One last question, Steve.
If you think that athletes have their own separate like division in college or whatever, so they can get paid, then what's the point of the NFL or the MLB or pro?
I'm glad you pointed that out. I wanted to say this. I do think that there's some collusion going on between the NFL, the NBA, and the NCAA. Why is there, I call it an artificial age limit to get into the NBA or NFL? Because what it does is it's sort of a game theory thing. It serves both parties perfectly. It serves the NCAA perfectly, and it serves the NFL and the NBA because they don't have to start farm leagues. So it's a perfect system right now. Should a person, a young person who's 17 or 18, who's talented at basketball, be able to try out for the NBA? Absolutely. I mean, you're restricting their ability. Golf and tennis, you can go into golf and tennis when you're 16 and make money and keep your money, right? So yeah, I think that whole system is not fair. That needs to be broken down. What I would do is try to get rid of the age limit in the NBA for sure, and then maybe minimize the NFL age limit.
Okay, we'll have to stop it there. Thank you so much.